Hello, everybody. Welcome to Friday. Friday, finally. Hope everybody is doing well. This is Jack Hammer of the Santa Rosa Press Democrat coming on, and today I've got a special guest with me. Finally get to talk to Brad Graham of the SF 49ers. It's great to have you on, Brad. How you doing?
I'm doing great, man. It's not like there's anything going on around these parts, is there?
No, it's always quiet around the 49ers. They seem to have really dull off seasons and just really not a whole lot to talk about when it comes to the 49ers. You know, it's just it's a shame, really.
Right. No, there's plenty of stuff going on. I'm doing great, and I appreciate you having me on your show, man.
Yeah, no, this is fantastic. I'm really excited to finally get a chance to chat with you. And the top topic everybody wants to talk about right now is Jimmy Garoppolo, and there was a lot of news going around after the trade of Carson Wentz on Wednesday, and it seemed like something might happen very quick there with Indianapolis. That hasn't happened. I wanted to ask you, what do you feel the trade deadline is for the 49ers? Do you think it's the 16th for the 49ers, or do you think it might be, or do they even have one?
I mean, I would have to assume it's as soon as possible because clearly teams want to start setting the structure for free agents that potentially are going to be coming in, that they could be signing, and we know they go quickly. So I would imagine not only the 49ers, but other teams would like to have their quarterback in place. So 16th being the official start to free agency does seem like a really viable date. But I think it actually becomes now a moving target, especially with some of the other news that has popped up as of late.
Yeah, it definitely is. And I think the thing here for me when I look at this is for the 49ers, they can get under the salary cap without moving Garoppolo. It's a little more difficult. They'd have to do some restructures to get there. Um, I think it might be more of an issue for these teams that they're possibly trading Garoppolo to, especially if it's Indianapolis, maybe even New Orleans, Pittsburgh. Those three teams, they're going into free agency, and their quarterback situation really doesn't bode well for being able to bring in a free agent, especially on the offensive side. How are you going to, you're going to sell a top flight wide receiver and come in to play with big, what's his name? Mason Rudolph
Right.
in Pittsburgh,
Dwayne
or
Haskins.
yeah, some of these guys that they have. And so for me, I think these teams that are trying to acquire Garoppolo may have more of a deadline than San Francisco does. Uh, that being said, I think that you're looking at probably Monday for those teams as well, because that's when they can start talking to these free agents.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what it feels like in my opinion as well. Because the Colts, for example, like who I would imagine is going to be one of the top candidates for the services of Jimmy Garoppolo, they have a nice wide receiver in Michael Pittman, but Paris Campbell, Naeem Hines, who's kind of that wide back role. T.Y. Hilton's on his way out. They really could use some upgrades at the wide receiver position, but which wide receivers are going to come over and sign without really knowing who the quarterback is for the team? Because for all we know, it could wind up being someone completely other than Jimmy Garoppolo, and that could have an impact on how teams move forward. So I would imagine, not only the 49ers, but these other teams want to get that figured out as soon as possible.
Yeah, I would think so. And then, in terms of, we talked about maybe a deadline, but where do you think that he's going to go? And what do you think the 49ers should expect to get in return for Jimmy Garoppolo?
So I'm fresh off the NFL Combine. I was actually there with Jordan Elliott, Rob Shue, and Jason Aponte, and we had a blast. Not only at the Combine, but we got to talk to a lot of different people, and we got to talk to Indianapolis Colts beat reporters, of course, other player personnel, and things like that. And what we were hearing from the Combine is it felt like it was a very natural fit for Jimmy Garoppolo to end up on the Colts. Not only did it feel like the way the Colts are structured, from a defensive side of things, offensive side, the way they run the football with Jonathan Taylor, feels like from a scheme standpoint, he would fit into what they want to do. He's also the kind of counter opposite of what Carson Wentz is, and especially with all the things that we've heard about Carson Wentz, the knocks on Carson are about the person and the
Mm-hmm.
person in the building from Monday to Saturday. Now, on Sunday, Carson was able to be able to still show some of the arm talent that he has, the mobility, and things from a physical standpoint that people judge quarterbacks on. But the things that we are hearing why they moved off of him is because of the person, because of the leader, and those types of intangibles. Well, look at Jimmy Garoppolo. And what do we talk about with Jimmy Garoppolo? It feels like every day. He's a great person. He's a great locker room guy. They really enjoy the person, and we know the team as a whole was galvanized by Jimmy, and they kind of played for Jimmy in a sense. And in the grand scheme of things, with a group of men, that's kind of what you want. You want them to be able to be galvanized by a person or a leader to be able to move towards a common goal. Well, Carson Wentz wasn't that guy for Indianapolis, but Jimmy could be that guy for Indianapolis. Plus, you got guys like DeForest Buckner, who know him extremely well. And
Mhm.
what we've heard from some of the beat reporters as Defoe has, just like he solidified himself in San Francisco as the leader, as the main locker room guys, he's done that already in Indianapolis, and they trust him. And I know Defoe has an affinity for Jimmy Garoppolo, so it feels like the perfect marriage. And when talking with fans, around Colts fans around in the area, their perception of Jimmy Garoppolo is much different than the way 49er fans at least talk about him. So if I had to give a perfect destination, I know the Steelers are discussed as a really good destination with Najee Harris and Chase Claypool and all the weapons they have, Pratt Firemouth at tight end, and the defense they have could be a good spot. But I would see Indianapolis as being the perfect spot for Jimmy.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I think I really agree with that. I've been saying that from a destination standpoint. I tweeted it out on the 1st of February. There was some conversation around this, and I tweeted out that the perfect landing spot for Jimmy Garoppolo would be Indianapolis. They've got the run game. They've
Mhm.
got some strength in the offensive line, especially in the middle.
Yep.
As you know, quarterbacks hate having that pressure in their face, and
Mhm.
Garoppolo is no exception with that. And then they have the defensive side of the ball. They have a really strong. It's funny because in a lot of ways they're very similar to the 49ers defense. They
Mhm.
have a really good defensive line led by Buckner. They're really, they have one of the best linebackers in the game behind that, and they're solid in the secondary. Uh, and the Colts are a team with where I think with a quarterback like Jimmy Garoppolo, they can get over the kind of get off of this little bit of a skid they've been on the last few years of not being able to reach the playoffs. And you're right.
Absolutely.
I think it's interesting when you talk about Garoppolo because you can't quantify leadership by a stat. That's not something that you can point to, and people kind of shake their head and laugh about it. But for in a lot of ways, if you have a quarterback that everybody believes in, that carries a lot more weight than I think a lot of folks realize.
I would absolutely agree that it is something that's hard to quantify. I like to look at the way I scout players by trying to scout them through the human lens, not just what they're capable, how good can they throw, how fast can they run, how high can they jump. All those things are great. But if you got a guy with immense talent who doesn't gel well with others, again, it's at least 11 guys on one side of the football trying to move in a million different directions and angles. And, when something goes wrong and you got a guy in the center of it pointing fingers saying, like, what are you doing? That can derail a lot of things, especially in an ego driven sport like football. So when you have a guy who's calm, cool, and collected, you can really that permeates the rest of the guys. So it's always something that I try to keep in the front of my mind when I talk about football. These guys are humans and they respond just like humans. Now I know we see the name, we see the jersey, we see the hype, we see that kind of stuff. But when you funnel it down, these are humans just like you and I, and they require certain types of dynamics in regards to power, struggle, leadership, things like that, and respect. And so I think with Jimmy Garoppolo, he is absolutely proven he can not only earn the respect of everyone in the locker room, but they will play for him. And that is a valuable trait, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm with you 100% on that. When was the last time we saw a 49ers player come out and talk bad about the quarterback? They haven't done it. They're all supportive of
Yeah.
him. We don't see like the tirades on the sidelines. They might get upset because the ball doesn't come their way every once in a while, that kind of thing. But you don't see them like the berating. You don't see them yelling at each other on the sidelines. There's
The only yelling we get's from Kyle. That's about it.
yeah, and that's how it should be, right? The head coach
Yeah,
is able.
exactly.
He's able to go out there and chew everybody's tail if he needs to. It's just an interesting thing, and I feel like when it comes down to Garoppolo and the Colts, it seems to me like a couple of thirds, maybe the second one becoming a second round pick in 2023 if everything works out fine, would be sufficient capital for the 49ers to acquire.
Yeah, I like that 43 pick. They did that swap with the Commanders, I think. I think they went from 48 to 43. So it was a nice little swap in the second. If you could
Mhm.
give me that 43, maybe some other ancillary picks, maybe a 2023 pick. Um,
Mhm.
I think the talent and the way we view Jimmy, if it was in a vacuum, he's probably worth around a second, maybe second and a fourth, something like that. But when you look at the supply and demand model that exists, and I think, Deshaun, that news, I think rattles that whole supply and demand model. Um,
Mhm.
it's going to be interesting to see how it's impacted. But I think based on you see what Russ got and you see what Carson got in the trade, I think you might be able to finesse a little bit more than what like baseline worth, just based on there's not a lot of quarterbacks out there, and there's not a lot of quarterbacks who has proven at least that can lead a team and lead them to the playoffs and deep into the playoffs. I think that's valuable. So I think they could get maybe that 43, maybe a couple ancillary picks tied onto the back end of it. Um, but it's going to be very interesting to see what he actually goes for.
Yeah, it'll be fun. It reminds me a lot of the whole Alex Smith drama. You remember when Alex Smith and Cap
Yeah.
and is Alex Smith going to be traded? That was kind of there was a good number of people even after Kaepernick took him to the Super Bowl in 2012, the 2013 Super Bowl, that were saying bring Alex Smith back. They need to stay with Alex Smith, and there was other people that were saying no, go with Kaepernick, and they're not going to get anything for Smith anyway. And I think they got a couple of second round picks for him at the end
Yeah,
of the
they got
day.
a good haul for him.
Yeah, so this seems very similar to me with the way that the people look at Jimmy Garoppolo, because when you really boil it down, when Jimmy Garoppolo's been on the field, he's won a lot of games.
Yeah.
So
He really has. And like again, I've had to check myself, as a fan, as someone who analyzes the sport. I've had to put myself in players' shoes, and I've had to put myself. I played center in college, I played guard in college, and I had to put myself in that moment. Like, how did I feel when my quarterback threw a pick? Did I get pissed off? Like, did I get angry? Did we deteriorate? No, we didn't. It was literally you're trained as an athlete. It's one play, wipe it. One play, wipe it. So if it's a good play, that's great. You still wipe it. If it's a bad play, okay, you still wipe it because you live to play the next down. So I had to put myself into that perspective of we're fans. So we live and we die, or if you're an analyst and you're trying to break it down, we live and die with every move that they
mhm.
make, and we stack them together, and we start comparing and contrasting. When you're a football player and you're in the trenches, you want to win. And at the end of the day, that's all you want. You just want to win. And I've heard players talk about it. They're like, man, people don't appreciate ugly wins anymore. And I don't think they do. But
Yeah.
as a player and trying to remember what that was like, my quarterback went out there and threw a pick, and an ugly pick. We just washed it and let's go win the game. Like, we're not going to dwell on it. We're not going to worry about it. And I think as fans, and analysts, we can just totally hone in on the negativity, rather than trying to rationalize that these guys are living to play the next play. And I think that's
Mhm.
where football guys might value Jimmy a lot differently than the consensus might value Jimmy.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up, because you were a center, I was a quarterback, so I was the guy making the mistakes when I was playing, and you're the guy you get mad,
I was the guy not blocking for you, getting you hit.
and that's one of those things. It's funny that you say that, because when I'm analyzing the game and breaking down the film and kind of looking at it, it's like you see a guy who he misses a throw down the sidelines, and you're like, dang, that's wide open. That should be a completion. And then you come back and you're like, well, they end up scoring a touchdown on this drive. So am I really going to hammer him on missing this throw? Or am I going to just go ahead and realize how he made up for it afterwards? And that's one of the things I think people get frustrated with me when I talk about Jimmy Garoppolo and talking, and I'm not throwing him under the bus, because there's plenty of times when he makes a mistake, but he comes back and he still gets a score or what have you. And that's the difference. And if the quarterback's able to lead a drive after a mistake, that's great. If he throws interception, that's bad, obviously. But if he can come back and score points and all that kind of stuff, you got to play the next down. That's how it is with every position. And that's a great point that you made right there.
Well, I also think too that's why they like him so much, because he doesn't get rattled. He'll go out there, he'll make a mistake, but he stays calm, and everyone feeds off that. So I think that's something that just kind of slides under the radar at times.
No, that's a great point. He kind of has a little bit of I think he reminds people of Eli Manning a little bit too much with his just kind of, he doesn't get angry. He just kind of shakes his head or whatever and walks to the sidelines. He goes to the next play. There's a little bit of that in him there. Without the Super Bowl rings, though, unfortunately.
Yeah, he does.
But aside from Jimmy Garoppolo, there was some big news that came out today, and with Deshaun Watson, and there's not going to be any charges on Deshaun Watson. The grand jury decided not to press charges. So kind of moving forward, it's going to be now, where does he land? He's going to be traded from Houston. It's just a matter of where he goes. With the recent trade of Russell Wilson, 49er fans were pretty happy about that, but now is Deshaun Watson going to end up
now?
Right. The question is he going to end up in Seattle?
Honestly, that feels like a great spot for him. It feels like a great spot. Clearly you get the pulse of Seattle's fan base. They're hurting. They're in a lot of pain. Russ was their franchise quarterback. That was their guy that brought them to the tippy top, got them the championship and made them a relevant team. Again, Russ owned the 49ers. It's 15-4 with his time against the Niners. And he had our number. And so, they're hurting a little bit, but nothing would wipe away that pain faster than them trading for Deshaun Watson. And that's just a fan perspective, but you look at it from, a team perspective, a roster building perspective. The NFC West is stacked, and the Seattle's going to look down the line. They see Trey Lance, like, okay, he is a young prospect who has an extremely high ceiling. You look at Kyler Murray. He's a Pro Bowler already, and he can get better even with what he is right now. And then, of course, Matthew Stafford just led them to a championship. So getting a guy like Deshaun Watson, it's par for the course. Look at the way the AFC West is reacting to Russell Wilson coming to their division. The Chargers go out and trade for Khalil Mack right away. They're like, okay, you're going to get Russ Broncos. We're going to get Khalil Mack, and we're going to make it a lot harder for you to be successful. And that's kind of how you have to react in these deep divisions. So I think if I'm Seattle and I got those 2 firsts, I had 2 seconds, Drew Lock as a backup, if I want to throw him into a trade. Noah Fant was a good piece, I thought, a former first-round tight end, I believe. You have the capital to be able to make a splash like that. And that's the kind of splash you need to make to be competitive in the NFC West, because we look at the quarterback draft, Malik's nice, but he's probably going to need some time. You got guys like Matt Corral, and the list goes on, and they're kind of that mid-tier, Kenny Pickett, just, I don't know. Are they those guys that you want to invest in, especially in their rookie season? So I could see that being a fit, but what is going to be interesting is, does a team like the Browns go like, oh, we're not sold on Baker. We'll live with him if we have to, but if we can get Deshaun and we can spend an exorbitant amount of capital to get him, well, how does that change the market, or how does that change the landscape? Or if the Panthers go all in, because we know they are, and they're kind of a dumpster fire, and they kind of need a guy like Deshaun to kind of put a Band-Aid on that. It's just going to be I think it's going to be turned into a bidding war over Deshaun at a certain point. And then what does the aftermath look like based on where he goes?
Right. And he has that no trade clause. So he's going to be able to dictate a little bit of how this plays out too. And,
Yeah.
I agree with you on the fit in Seattle. I think it just makes total sense for them. They're not as far away as I think some people feel that they are. You know, I think you get little bit of an upgrade here at the quarterback position, going from Watson to Wilson really at this point in their careers, if he's able to play at the same level as he was before taking this last year off.
Yeah. Still
I don't
young
feel
too.
Yeah, exactly. I don't feel like they lost anything at linebacker with moving off of Bobby Wagner. He's up there in age.
Yeah, he was
Uh,
getting up there.
yeah, so this is a really good landing spot for him if that's where he goes. And that's one. And or if you're him, and you might want to say I want to go to Carolina because you look at who Carolina has to play, and there's really nobody in their division that has a quarterback that'd be better than you. So maybe Carolina would be the spot that you want to go to if you're Deshaun Watson, because it's a little bit easier road to the Super Bowl or at least into the playoffs.
Hmm.
So it'll be a fun one to see how this one plays out too. Just another one of those crazy things. But before we go on, just want to throw up a couple names real quick here. Rafael says, "What's up, Jack and everyone? It's good to have you in." Jesus, ready to go on a Friday.
My guy.
Yep. I think these are always you got some of your buddies in here, which is great.
If you see any SDS, that's my crew.
That's your okay. Then we got Buck, and we've
Yeah,
got
there we go.
Hendricks. Let's see who else we got. We got
Squad.
Jay go crazy.
Yep.
Says what's good. There's so that we got a bunch of them in here, and then Harold's one of my guys who comes on all the streams a lot of times. So he says hello to everybody. So definitely a good crew here on a Friday. Everybody's just kind of waiting for some news to drop. I don't really know what it is they're looking for, but they're looking
Right.
for something around a quarterback or something. But hey, and look at there's Lucas popping in there. He says we're shouting people out. He's one of my regulars. So great to have him on. And you had mentioned you were out at the scouting combine real quick. I didn't I know we hadn't talked about this, but I do want to get into the 49ers offensive line and how that might shake out. But before we get there, kind of what were some of your takeaways from the combine?
Oh my God. It was a bucket list event for me.
Uh-huh.
I'm big into the draft. I've been big into the draft for about 10 years now. I love scouting. I love the evaluation process. I love identifying talent, seeing where they land and seeing how they elevate. Do they elevate like I thought they were, or they land in a worse spot? How does it work out? But I love the process, and I had went to the Senior Bowl last year. That was an amazing experience, exceeded my expectations.
Mm-hmm.
But again, combine was a bucket list item as well. Just absolutely blew away anything that I thought it could have been. It was amazing. Just the ability to be in that atmosphere where everywhere you look, you recognize everyone, whether it's media, whether it's football players, um, personnel staffs, or just anyone you can imagine. You're gonna walk past. Just like it
Mm-hmm.
was crazy. One of the days I was on the field and I walked up to my seat and I didn't even know, but Leslie Frazier, former head coach of the Vikings, was sitting right next to us, and I didn't know who. I didn't even make the connection that was him, and I was like, he was just sitting there, like he was
Uh-huh.
part of our crew, but he was minding his own business. And I'm like, oh, that was he's like the DC now, I think, for the Bills. Um,
I think so.
so it was just a wild experience, man. It was really, really awesome. And again, being able to be there with guys that I know, like Jordan and Rob and Jason, it was a great experience.
Yeah, it was definitely a lot of fun watching you guys go through that whole week because I was not there and I was following along on Twitter, and to see what you guys were doing, and to see Rob and
Yeah.
Jason and Jordan. I don't remember. I think I saw a post from you where I think you were the one who was talking to RG3, correct?
Yeah.
You're,
I
yeah,
started a conversation with RG3 and it turned into a whole bunch of stuff.
yeah, I mean it was fabulous. It was a lot of fun, watching all you guys asking questions and getting down into it. And yeah, it was exciting. Definitely makes me wanting to make sure that I get out there next year. I know it's not going to be
Yes.
in Indy, but definitely
Get
to get
out
out
there
there. And
next year, 100%.
yeah, because it
Absolutely.
looked like a lot of fun. It looked like a good time in terms of to kind of continue growing
Yeah.
and getting better at what everybody's doing. And it was fantastic. And there's JC jumping in really quick, but kind of leading into that, what I had said was I wanted to get into the offensive line a little bit with you. And maybe we can even keep on this, if there were some guys at the combine, but how do you think the 49ers offensive line is going to shake out this year? You've got Blake and Tomlinson, his deal he might not be back. You have Alex Mack. It sounds like it's going to be back, but then you have Daniel Brunskill and Mike McGlinchey over on the other side. What do you think this offensive line is going to look like in 2022?
It's one of my biggest questions heading into this year. Obviously, a big offensive line guy. I pay attention to those guys quite a bit. It's the position I scout the most on the 49ers. I don't know, because it's kind of a domino effect, right? If Laken Tomlinson doesn't return, all of a sudden we have a massive hole at left guard with Alex Mack. I brought this up earlier on my past stream, but and John Lynch has indicated it sounds like he'll return.
Mm-hmm.
But if you remember when Joe Staley retired, they kept it under wraps, and they kept it under wraps for a reason. It
Mm-hmm.
was for them to gain leverage in the trade to get Trent Williams from Washington on a draft day trade. So they've done it before. They've hid a retirement before.
Mm-hmm.
They were sitting on the Weston Richburg retirement for quite some time. So they've sat on retirements before in order to help build out the roster. So I am not out the weeds yet with the Alex Mack thing. I'm praying that he comes back, because my goodness, do we need him? But I'm hoping he comes back. But there is a world that exists where he doesn't. And if that happens, then oh boy, that's potentially two guys.
Mm-hmm.
And then with Brunskill, I do feel like he will be back. He is a restricted free agent. And unless some other team comes and pays him a bunch of money where the 49ers don't match, I do see a world where he's back with the team, and that is okay by me. I'm probably one of his biggest fans. And I appreciate the talent that he brings. I know a lot of people focus on where he lacks in pass protection in one-on-one situations, which rightfully so. It's not his strongest point, but he does a lot of other things really, really well,
Mm-hmm.
especially in the run game, and especially how they used him as a puller this year. He was great for how they used him. But
Mm-hmm.
McGlinchey too. What's going on with McGlinchey? So it's just it's crazy. So I'm scouting, but for the 49ers, I think it's an okay problem to have, because I think this offensive line class is fantastic in regards to top tier talent, mid tier talent, and lower tier developmental talent. I think you can find a center, guard, or tackle at multiple levels of this draft who can be an impact year one, or maybe an impact on year three. It just depends, but there's a lot of guys in this class.
Really quick before I ask you about a couple of names from the draft class. You were at a lot of the training camp practices when they're at Santa Clara this last year. What do you think? What are your thoughts on the two guys that were rookies last year, where they might be able to fit into this? I know, Banks played his entire career at Notre Dame on the left side, and they tried to shift him over to the right. Do you think that maybe they try to slide him back over to the left side now here in 2022, and maybe slide more inside? I know you and I had a little back and little. You responded to me on Twitter with regards to more
Oh
going
yeah, I
down and
remember
kicking into
that.
right guard. So I just wasn't sure like what your thoughts were on the possibility of maybe those guys stepping into the starting lineup in some way.
Yeah. What was really cool is we were talking to Maurice Jones-Drew in between NFL Network hits on the day they're doing running backs.
Okay.
So we were actually on the field, and he was talking to us just like we were just shooting the stuff. We're like normal people, like no
Mm-hmm.
big time vibes, nothing. We're just talking about football. And he just unsolicitedly told Jordan and I, "Oh, don't sleep on Aaron Banks. Don't sleep on Aaron Banks." And we're like, okay. He didn't have nice things to say about Trey Sermon,
Uh-huh.
but he did say don't sleep on Aaron Banks. He likes what Aaron Banks provides. I know Jordan also talked to a guy that I have lots of respect for in regards to the O-line kind of category, Brandon Thorne. Um, Brandon told Jordan that he still thinks Aaron Banks is going to be a guy. You go back and you watch the tape. Aaron Banks was a monster at Notre Dame.
Mm-hmm.
It got to a point where I was through 3, 4, 5 games of studying each one of his reps, and I'm like, this guy doesn't lose. He
Yeah.
doesn't lose. But we also understand the transition from college to the NFL might be the steepest for
Hmm.
offensive linemen because you're going up against defensive linemen in college who aren't technically polished. Whereas you're coming to the NFL, every one of those guys that you face on that defensive line has got 3 moves with 4 counters off of it, and they have the athletic build and strength behind it. So I think there is a bit of a transition period, and when you take a guy, you move him from left to right, you're changing kind of like the mechanics that are
Yeah.
involved, especially on the offensive line. It's like a mirror, and then trying to, but it's the same play, but you have to mirror it
Hmm.
because you go from a left-handed stance to a right-handed stance. So the way you do everything is like a mirror. And I think
Hmm.
people, you know, don't think of it like that at times, and that's rightfully so. But I think that was one of the issues. But if you put him back at left, maybe he feels more comfortable there. And again, you put him next to Trent Williams in between potentially Alex Mack. I think he would be able to do okay. Again, I watched him at training camp, saw the struggle at training camp. I was like, okay, this is definitely Brunskill's job. Like Brunskill's not losing that right guard spot, which
Hmm.
I thought could have happened. But when you saw it in camp, you're like, yeah, he needs some time. Um,
Great.
and with Moore, I always thought that he was a baseline solid pass blocker when it comes to his kick set technique and the way that he's able to keep his balance and move his feet. I've always just thought he's really kind of light in the run game, which is, I think, where we were going. The back and forth of kicking him inside is just because I see his natural ability being a pass blocker
Hmm.
and using that kick step, getting out in space, playing on an island. When you shift inside, you take that away. The island that you're playing on is much different. You're not really kicking back like that, and then you have to be a little bit more stout in the run game. So I just see it as like it's just like a little bit of differentiating of what his traits are, at least from my perspective. But
I
I
just
do
got you.
see a world that exists where Jalen Moore can develop. He didn't develop, I think, in the right direction. He kind of went backwards a little bit. He had a really rough game against Jacksonville when they tried to put him on the right side.
Yeah,
He was
real quick. I'm going to stop you. I'm going to ask you about that because that was kind of where I was going to. I sorry I interrupted you, but
no, go for it.
the Jacksonville game, that was what I want to ask you is what was it about that game where they decided, because that's when they made the move to Tom
Compton.
Compton, at the second half of that, and he played the rest of the season. Kind of what was it about his performance there do you think led them to make that change?
So it was crazy because they benched him the series before halftime. So it
Hmm.
wasn't like they went into halftime because what Kyle had talked about was like, oh, well, we went into this game planning to have one start one half, one play the other half. And it's like, Kyle, you benched him the series before halftime because you had to. And the reason why
Hmm.
they had to is because they could not complete the pass off on stunts. And so if you're not familiar, you have a like say a 3 tech, right? He's sitting there right over the guard. You have the defensive end, maybe in a wide 9, and they do the loop action. Well, you don't want to stay man on and stay with the guy who's looping because that's
Hmm.
how they get you. They get you tripped up and they're able to loop around. You have to pass it off. It's kind of like basketball zone, right? You
Hmm.
just play your zone. If they come into your zone, you take them. If they leave your zone, you let them go because you know your tackle's going to get it.
Yeah.
They Moore just couldn't do it. And it got to the point where I saw on tape Brunskill, like I didn't see him like actually say it, but I saw the point where they said we're not switching and we are staying man. And when I saw that, where they had to literally abandon the technique that they're trying to execute, I said, "Oh, that's not a good sign." And
Hmm.
then right after that, boom, I think it was like literally that next series, Compton came in, and then we never saw from Jalen Moore again. And I think that's an underrated thing that fans don't take into account between Brunskill and McGlinchey. I watched every rep of those two this year. they did not lose on a stunt. Every stunt that got thrown at them, whether it was a linebacker stunt, whether it was just defensive tackle, DN stunt, they were able to pass it off. They're in lockstep. It's a continuity we talk about of offensive line being a unit, a team within the team, because you have to be able to be lockstep like that. You have to know that, hey, if I'm going to let Aaron Donald run free, that you're going to get him and that I don't
Mhm.
look like a doofus because I just passed him off.
Right.
And so going back to the Jacksonville game, that's why Moore got benched. They couldn't execute the pass off on stunts, and it
Mhm.
was getting to the point where it was really ugly.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I was thinking that might have had to do with a little bit of his run blocking and not quite being quite as strong in that area.
It
But
was
that's
actually the
definitely
stunts and pass blocking, which
there you go.
again I think it was more of a continuity issue than anything else.
Probably, and that's one of the things. You mentioned Mike McGlinchey and how that group hadn't been. Those him and Brunskill had done such a good job of passing those off. And I agree with you. I think McGlinchey this year was, if he was getting beat up by fans, it was a little over the top because I felt like he was playing much better in
He did.
2021 than he
He
had the
played a
year
lot
before.
better.
And so that's the tough one when you start looking at this 2022 line is he going to be able to be full speed and come back and be a productive member? Because if he's not, that really forces their hands in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
If Mike McGlinchey is not healthy, what do you think the 49ers do at right tackle?
I would like to see them address it in the draft, but again, if they need someone to play sooner rather than later,
Mm-hmm.
then that might be a mid-tier veteran. That they could theoretically see coming at a pinch. Colton McKivitz, again, they re-signed just recently. They were able to, I think, get him on the tender. I'm not exactly
Yeah.
sure how they got him back.
Mm-hmm.
But Colton McKivitz is back. We remember Week 18 stepped up for Trent Williams on the left side in a must-win game, and he was very serviceable. So maybe they could identify him as a guy who could step in a pinch. I know internally they really like Colton, at least from the locker room perspective. Um, but I also think there's great opportunity to go into the draft. There's a guy that I really like, Abe Lucas from Washington State. It
Okay.
is one of my favorite stories because I'm big on first impression with certain guys.
Mm-hmm.
And with Abe Lucas going into the combine, I had no idea who he was. I didn't know he existed. I had no clue.
Uh-huh.
But I'm watching these guys warm up to go run their 40, and I see this guy walking around. He looks really angry. Looks like he wants to punch someone. And I'm just like, I like that. And then I start watching it, and and I'm like, I'm scouting the body. I'm like, you know, he's got a good body for what it's worth, and like he's built really well. And I was like, he looked like he wanted to punch someone. And I'm like, who is this guy? Proceeds to go kill the workout. I pop on the tape when I get home, and I'm like, oh yeah, like we see him going against Drake Jackson, USC edge, who's probably going to be top 75 player. Thibodeau, out of Oregon, who's probably going to be a top 5 player, top 10 player. And I'm like, okay, yeah, he looked good in shorts and a t-shirt, but you throw on the tape and you can see how the athletic ability. I think he ran a 4.92. He's a big man, and you see it transfer on tape. Um, he's a guy that's played in a pass heavy offense, so maybe you get him third, fourth, and you develop him into a potential guy a year or two down the line. But he was a guy that I really liked and could be a fit for the 49ers. And then happened to find out he's been training with Joe Staley. So
There you go. And then I think there's another guy that was there that's been training with Joe Staley. Is it? I'm not sure if it was Alec Lidstrom or Cam Jurgens. Aren't one of those two trading with Joe Staley as well?
Cam Jurgens.
Okay, yeah, that was the name that Jordan kept mentioning to me when we talked on Wednesday. He was very high on what he saw out of him. Um, that's one of them. Lidstrom is a guy who I think fits well with what the 49ers do. The one other one I was going to ask you about real quick was what about Darius Kennard from Kentucky? Have you watched him at all?
So I only have watched him at the Senior Bowl. And so I'm very particular about
Oh,
my offensive linemen,
okay. Uh-huh.
especially zone offensive linemen.
Uh-huh.
I actually prefer the more athletic builds. Kennard, he's massive. Like he's intimidating. Like he just looks like your old school throwback, punch you in the mouth offensive lineman at
Mhm.
at, at tackle. But he's a big man. He's big, 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 and he's kind of lumbering. And for me, the prerequisite to be if I'm an O line coach and I'm building an O line, the first thing you have to have is first step quickness. That's like if we don't have first step quickness in my zone scheme,
Mhm.
we're probably not going to get along too well because I need you to explode. I need you to be able to reach an Aaron Donald in a 3 tech. I need that to happen. And if it's not going to happen, then it's kind of like it doesn't work with what we're trying to do. Now he feels more like a power fit, and I think he will be a good offensive lineman. I
Mhm.
just not sure. I got to watch more to be honest too. But my first impression is he's really big and he's kind of lumbering, and I want my offensive lineman to be able to move. That's my number one.
Yeah, you sound like Bob McKittrick. Back in the old days of the 49ers under Bill Walsh, that's what they talked all the time about. They like the smaller guys who can move,
Yep.
and they, obviously everybody knows about Bill Walsh and wanting to beat you to the punch. So
Yeah.
that's for darn sure. Now, that's been a lot of fun talking about the offensive line. I know the folks over here in the comments like it too. GD5, you know, about that breakdown with Compton. It was a great breakdown. Really, a lot of times fans don't think about the importance of knowing how to play a technique, right? Whether you're good or not. You have to know how to execute the right techniques, and that's absolutely correct on that one. And I also like the fact that you talked about the switch from the left side to the right side. That's a tough thing, and we even saw the number one offensive lineman in this year's draft struggle with that during the preseason in Penei Sewell.
Yep.
And it wasn't until they moved him back over to his
Right.
natural
They kicked
side
him
that
back to the left. I'm like, oh, okay, it's fine now.
yeah, all of a sudden he did good, and then once that guy that he was replacing over there came back, he went over to the right side and played better. It's kind of funny how you get a guy experienced at a position that he's really comfortable with, and then he can
Mhm.
maybe do some other things. And uh, so I agree with that, and I feel like Aaron Banks is definitely somebody to keep an eye on. It just felt like so much of the 49ers draft in 2021 was really geared towards the season coming up. And really getting those guys ready for 2022 is kind of a transition year. So it's going to be fun to watch how that all works out. Uh, but before we jump off, I did have one other question for you. We're going to stay on the line, but we're going to go to the other side real quick. The 49ers, Chandler Jones is a free agent, and he's come out and kind of said at this point he's more looking for a team that fits him and what he's looking for and can bring the most out of him. Do you think the 49ers should take a shot at Chandler Jones?
I mean, we talked about Khalil Mack a little bit earlier about how the Chargers were like, all right, you got the Denver Broncos are going to add Russ in our division. Well, we're going to add Khalil Mack to put on the other opposite side of Joey Bosa. I think that I've been hunting for that edge guy opposite of Bosa. D Ford was that. He was that in 2019. And we got to see the fruits of what it looks like to have two elite edge rushers, and especially one who specializes in just being fast and creating havoc quickly in D Ford. But I don't think we can count on D Ford. Now, I would say D Ford's probably going to be headed into camp again this year, and we're probably going to see pretty similar output. He might look pretty good in camp early, but we'll judge D Ford when the season starts. Um,
Yeah.
if they can get Chandler Jones, man, like for 1 year even, just what can we get you for 1 year, maybe two? If you can do it, absolutely do it. He's one of the best, if not best, edge defenders in the NFL. With what he can do so many different things. Um, and to put that on the opposite side of Nick Bosa would just be phenomenal. And yes, I would really like that, especially with the quarterbacks that we have in our division, potentially maybe even another really good one. We know the name of the game. It's get after the passer. And if you get these guys uncomfortable, um, it makes it a lot easier for your defense. And so if they can do that with just bringing four, then that puts the 49ers defense in really good shape. And we know D'Amico's going to scheme it up.
Mm-hmm.
D'Amico's going to scheme it up. But if you can make D'Amico's job even easier with a guy like Chandler Jones, then please do that.
Yeah, and Chandler Jones is. I think you know when you look at Chandler Jones, this is a guy who's been a 10 plus, double digit sack guy in 6 of the last 7 years. So we know that he's got the ability to get out there and do it. The only year that he didn't hit it was 2020 when he was injured. He only played, I think, one game that season. So he was out for a while there, and that's partly why he didn't get the number. So I'm with you on that. If and if they can get Chandler Jones, I've been pretty high on Samson Ebicom. I'm one of those guys who, when you look at what he did once he moved into the starting lineup, I felt like Ebicom was a really solid player. I think it took him a little while to transition to just being a full time pass rusher. So if the 49ers can't get Chandler Jones, I'd be fine with maybe restructuring Ebicom to get his number down. But if you can get a guy like Chandler Jones, then you move off of Ebicom because this is a game-changing type of a play that, if that's what it requires in order to make the numbers work. So I'm with you. I
Absolutely.
think,
But there's also like you can get edge potentially in the draft. I think Boye
true.
Mafe
Mhm.
is a guy who made a lot of money at the combine. He started making money at the Senior Bowl, continued that process on to the combine. I spoke to people who train with him and are very high on what he can bring to the table. So I think this edge, it's a deep edge class too. And
Mhm.
so I think you can also supplement if, like, say you can't land Chandler Jones based on price or whatever. There's a lot of really solid people in this draft you can grab.
Yeah, and I agree that there's a pretty good number of guys that have been out there. That the name you brought up was one. There's a few others that I'm just blanking on at the moment, but there's definitely some potential there. And if you don't get Jones, you stay with Abacom. I think it's a good thing to bring one of those guys in and draft somebody in the second or third round. And they also need to bring back Willis as a. I think they need to bring back Willis. He's going to be cheap, and I really
Mhm.
like what Arden Key did as well. I just don't think they can
Oh,
bring both those guys back. So I think it's going to be one or
yeah.
the other of
He
those
might
two.
have made a little too much money.
I think so. I think he's going to be this year's version of what they had in 2020. And again, I'm blanking on
Kerry
his name.
Hyder.
Kerry Hyder. Thank you for picking me up. There's good
I
teammates. See,
got
there's
you.
my offensive lineman helping out the quarterback who just
I
threw a pick
got you.
right there.
Got to protect my quarterback.
I just threw a pick and you picked me up. Uh, Real quick, and then I'm going to hit this one real quick. Daryl
Yeah, let's do
says,
it.
thank you for the donation. He says, Sup, Jack, sup, Brad, off topic. Your boy Grant says some of the most insane things. He said, trade Trey Lance for DW. I'm not sure who DW is.
Deshaun
Probably Deshaun
Watson.
Watson. Hey, if Grant said that, then that's fine. I don't have a problem with a lot of the things that he says. He usually has some kind of a reasoning behind it. I laughed at him when he said to trade George Kittle, and the more I thought about it, the more his reasoning behind it made sense. Although I don't think he make that move.
I guess my take. So this is my thing. I think the 49ers would have had Deshaun Watson if it wasn't for the mess he got himself into. I really
Agree.
believe, based on what I've heard, behind the scenes, um, they were 100% going after him, and it was almost there.
Mm-hmm.
And it just the timing of it like couldn't have happened at any crazier time, and it would, of course, force the 49ers to completely pivot off of what they were trying to do, which led them down this path to Trey Lance. Um, I mean, we're hearing Mike Florio. He's still saying Tom Brady is going to be the week one quarterback for the 49ers. Trade Trey Lance for Deshaun Watson. I mean, it's the 49ers. We're going to be talking about quarterback movement until Trey Lance wins us a Super Bowl. Then people will start believing about Trey Lance. And then by the time we actually believe Trey Lance, 49ers will probably end up actually trading
No, I agree.
on
I
our level.
agree. Yeah, no, I'm with you there. I think that's exactly what'll happen because it doesn't matter who the quarterback is around the 49ers if
It
they're
doesn't.
not if they're not making plays and winning Super Bowls, everybody's looking for the next great thing.
It
So
does. It really doesn't matter. We're going to be talking about this regardless. Insert X player's name here. Doesn't matter.
yeah, I
I've come
agree.
to that conclusion.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, it makes sense from the standpoint of what you just said in terms of they were high on going with him, but I think at this point they wouldn't make that move. I think that's why they spent so much money to re-sign the quarterback that they just did in um,
Sudfeld.
yeah, Nate Sudfeld, just that's a crazy contract, and we didn't get a chance to talk about that one today. But I think they're moving on. This quarterback situation is going to be Trey Lance, and they're going to be just fine with it. So I can understand people making a good. They can make a really strong argument for me but I'm just going to disagree with you because Trey Lance is the future of the 49ers, and I'm looking forward to seeing what he can bring to the table. He looked really good during training camp, and then kind of just fell off a little bit towards the end, and I think that's why he didn't start and wasn't able to make the plays to take the job away from Jimmy. I think that's what they were hoping, is that he was going to blow it out, against the Chargers, and he wasn't able to. And I just think that's kind of when they pulled the reins back just a little bit. So
I was really hoping they were going to give him some starting reps in training camp, man. I was thinking what, like 5 total. Like I was just hoping, like, because I remember the first rep that he got in training camp. It was a design. It was a quarterback counter behind Mike McGlinchey up the left side. And I'm like, that's great. I love to see Trey Lance run and all, but can we just let the man throw,
yeah,
please?
yeah, and I know it's funny because it seemed to me like all those starting reps for Lance came into play when they were down in Los Angeles or going up against the Chargers in practice, but
Yeah.
didn't really see a whole lot of them up here.
Yeah. So it'll be interesting, but just to touch really quickly on the Sudfeld thing, I think it does. I've seen those two together in person, and I've seen the way that they kind of vibe together, and I think that makes sense. I mean, just from the one interaction, again, I was able to go to a premiere of Trent Williams' documentary, a bunch of teammates there, but it was like a laid back event when it was very private. So you got to kind of see these guys in their element. And Sudfeld and Trey, they came together. Like you could tell there was a vibe between them, and so it makes sense to me, especially to a guy who's been in the league for quite some time. You might not have the starting experience, but he's been through it, so he can provide and be a bouncing board for Trey Lance. But what do you think about this? What do you think about this? What do you think about that? And thought Sudfeld was a good backup behind Carson Wentz back in the day. So I'm high on. I've been high on Sudfeld, but those are for completely different reasons than other people are.
No, I get your point there, and that kind of goes along with the whole signing of Brian Greasy, right? You get a guy in the building, you have two guys that, you have the one that's been more of a veteran leadership, and even though he's never been a coach before, who can come in and really point to a lot of things that Trey Lance is going to need, and then you also have the other quarterback there, who's the guy that's actually playing with them all the time, who can kind of work with them through some of these things, and they can bounce stuff off of, hey, are you seeing this and that kind of stuff. So I think it's going to be a fun thing to watch as this progresses, and the 2022 49ers are going to be an interesting group, I really think.
I would have to agree with you. It's get your popcorn ready because it's going to be a show. That's for sure. I just can't wait for training camp to start.
Yeah, same here. I'm with you on that. So I know we went over a little bit. I just want to say real quick, we're going to wrap up, but I wanted to thank you for making the time to come on with me today. This was a lot of fun. I know I follow you on Twitter and see a lot of what you're putting out there. And it's great to finally get a chance to talk 49er football with you.
Hell yeah, man. I've been seeing you around too. It's good to finally connect. I appreciate you inviting me on. It's been a blast. We definitely got to do it again some more time soon.
Yeah, and to everybody that's watching, if you can go ahead and hit the like button on this video, hit subscribe for my channel as well as Brad's. Make sure you click the little button up there so that you get the bell notification. So every time we go live, you see it. Beyond that, thank everybody for joining on the Friday. I'll be back on Monday with some new shows. Other than that, have a great weekend, and thanks again, Brad, and have a good time, everybody.
Absolutely. Peace, everyone.